Hello everyone, on behalf of the Mindalia TV team, welcome to Mindalia live streaming, where thousands of people around the world gather to see the content that we develop just to help raise the level of consciousness in the planet. Today we have the company of Carl Honoré. The title of his interview or this conversation is A New Mindset and the Slow Revolution. Carl Honoré is a writer, a journalist, and a broadcaster. Before starting with him, we just want to remind you that Mindalia's mission is to share information that can help raise the level of consciousness in the planet, and that you can help us by liking our content, following us in our different social media. You can subscribe to our channel, because when you do that, you're helping us reach as much people in the planet, and you are, of course, helping us develop more content like the content that we are going to be developing today. Having said that, I have the great pleasure of saying, Carl, welcome to Mindalia. How are you doing today?
Thank you very much. It's great to be with you.
It is my pleasure to have you here, and we're going to be having a conversation about the slow movement, and I think that the best way to start this would be just asking you about what the slow movement is. What is even slow? We are in a world in which we want everything fast. We want everything immediately. With the click, we are whatever we want to be. We get whatever we want to. We get whatever we want. We buy. We sell. We read. We purchase. What's slow in this world?
Slow is the opposite of all that. I mean, what slow is not, it's not about doing everything slowly at a snail's pace. That would be absurd, right? It'd be ridiculous. I'm not an extremist of slowness. I love speed. Sometimes faster is better. Sometimes I want to order something on Amazon with a click of a button, but not always, right? And that's the key to slow, this slow revolution with a capital S. It's about doing everything at the right speed, sometimes fast, sometimes slow, and then all the different speeds and tempos in between. It's a mindset, really. It's quality over quantity. It's about being present in the moment, doing one thing at a time. You remember when we used to do that? Ultimately, slow is about doing everything not as fast as possible, but as well as possible. Really simple idea, but an immensely countercultural one, and a totally revolutionary one in a world addicted to speed.
In a world in which we have so many tabs open, and this is an analogy, it's not only in the computer. In the computer we're working and we have 3 or 4 different tabs open. I'm listening to a YouTube video while I'm checking my emails, while I'm having a conversation through WhatsApp, and then I don't know, I'm probably checking tickets for a future flight. But our mind is also with so many tabs open at the same time. And what you are proposing, it sounds to me a little bit like probably surrender or living the now, something like that. I want you to channel me through that.
I don't think of it as surrender. I think of it more as a reboot, right? I think you're right. I think the metaphor is a good one, that we have too many tabs open on our laptops, our computers, but also in our heads, right? We've just got, our bandwidth is overblown, right? We just don't have enough bandwidth for the number of things we're trying to squeeze into every moment. So we find ourselves doing what seems so achingly modern and so much fun and so efficient. We do several things at once, right? But doing several things at once usually means doing several things not very well. And that's what the whole slow revolution is about, is saying, you know what, why not just focus wherever possible on one thing at a time, give each thing the time, the attention, the love it deserves. And whatever it is you're doing, you're going to do it better and enjoy it more. And that's from the workplace to raising children to the bedroom with your partner to whatever it is you're doing. If you're not rushing it, if you're trying to find the right speed, if you're giving your full self to that moment, you're going to get more out of that moment, whatever that moment is.
Does it have to do anything with the access of information? This is a generation, this is a time in which we have more access to information than we ever had. Read the other day that in the last 50 to 100 years, we have accomplished more, technologically speaking, than it has been accomplished in 2,000 years. And the speed and the development of our lifestyle has changed dramatically. But I kind of feel that we're not only accessing information, but we are kind of greedy. And in that greed for information, maybe we are not zesting, we are not enjoying, and we're not metabolizing said information. What do you think?
I think that's true. And I think that the analogy is one with obesity. If you think of us as animals that we're built for the savannah, right? For pre-civilization era, we're built for a time of famine, from scarcity. And that was fine when we lived in a world of scarcity. But now we live in a world where there's a Krispy Kreme donut on every corner. We don't know how to stop eating. The greed kicks in. It's a natural reflex, a natural inclination. We just eat and eat and eat. And there you see this kind of massive obesity problem around the world. The same thing is happening with information and social input from social media. We are hardwired to seek out social connection. And also we love the adrenaline rush of a little bit of information, sort of a little news flash and stuff. 10 years ago, we didn't have that when we left the home. Now we have it everywhere. You're in the bath and you're looking at your phone. You're standing in a line at the supermarket. People don't ever have a moment just to let their minds wander, to look up at the sky, to get bored even. We're also terrified of boredom. Immediately we get a moment where we don't have some activity programmed for us, we reach for that stimulation. So it's a kind of reflection, I think. It's a similar phenomenon with obesity. So we find ourselves with kind of information obese. We're informationally obese now, right? And what does obesity mean? It's unhealthy, it's excess, it's a lack of pleasure. It's no good, right? It takes a toll on us in so many ways. And I think that that's a big part of this, is not being anti-information. I'm not a Luddite. I love the technology. I have an iPhone and a MacBook. It's about how we manage the information, how we manage the flow when we switch on and off and that kind of thing. That's
about probably taking the time to digest what we are getting. And I wanted to ask you a little bit about, you are a researcher, you are a journalist, you have been involved in this. Do we actually have, like, biologically speaking, are our brains changing, the brains of our children? Is there something different with the actual build of our hardware?
I think human evolution does not move that quickly, right? So I think it's probably pretty clear that a baby born today is going to have a very similar brain to a baby born 30 years ago before Facebook and Twitter and TikTok. What's different is the childhood that child is growing up in, right? So from the very first moment, they may be looking at an iPad in the cradle, right? And bombarded by all of this stimulation and distraction and electronic input. So that changes the way they develop, right? That's going to, I think it's chipping away at our ability to focus, to concentrate on do one thing at a time, take pleasure from the moment. But that's obviously more a problem for the young who have, come into the scene, or more plastic brains and have less experience. But I do think this is a problem right across society. I mean, I look at my mom, she's gonna be 80 next year. She is as addicted to her smartphone and her iPad as my 18-year-old daughter, right? So I do think this is a human problem rather than a Gen Z or a millennial. This is a human problem and a human moment for us, I think.
Because who doesn't want to be in contact with the adrenaline of a like, for example, with the adrenaline of someone commenting in your post? How is the life, Carl? How is the one day in the life of someone practicing the slow movement? What does it change?
Well, I think it's important to say that there's no one size fits all. So everybody's going to be different. But what the key note of a slow life is that you just don't feel rushed. And that I feel in my own life, because I'm somebody who does a lot, has an interesting life. I used to travel before COVID, but so my schedule seems full, but I don't ever feel hurried, right? Whereas before I felt rushed all the time. Every moment of my day in the past was a race against the clock. I never felt like I had enough time. Now I've always got enough time because, I may be doing slightly fewer things, but the things I do, I'm totally engaged with them, right? They're getting all my attention. And I just don't feel as tired or as distracted or as rushed as I did before. So I think when people look at a life from the outside, it can look to someone like maybe my life isn't very slow. It probably looks quite fast to a lot of people. But what matters is what it feels like to me. And it feels calm. It feels serene. It feels in balance. It feels right. And that's the only measure, right? That's the yardstick for all of us. Not what other people think, what other people perceive. What matters is what you feel about time and how it passes. And if you feel it's not running away from you, then you're onto the right track.
I think I'm drooling just to think of a life in which I am not in a rush. I feel that I wake up in the morning, I'm already in a rush. I need to get this and I need to get that, and I have emails to answer and I have calls to make. But I am fascinated about what you're saying of this not being a one size fit all. So we can tailor our own speed. Is that right? Depending on our
Very much so.
lifestyle, depending on our own energy, because every person has their own particular energy in which they feel good doing things with, right?
Exactly. Everybody is born with their own internal metronome, right? So what's fast for me may seem very slow to you, and what's more or less right for you might seem really fast to me. So it really is a very personal thing, finding the right tempo, or what musicians call the tempo giusto, right? The right tempo for the moment. That's a very, very personal thing. The other thing to remember is that your tempo is not always going to be the same. As you say, your energy fluctuates, it ebbs and flows, it goes up and down. So maybe this month I'm going to want to work really long days, right? It makes sense for my business. It makes sense for how I feel physically, but that's not going to be the way the whole year will be, right? Maybe next month or next week, I'm going to dial it down, and perhaps I'll only put in a 4-day week or something. So it's always about not locking yourself into the same time rhythm, day in, day out, week in, month after month. It's about kind of always adjusting, modifying, ducking and diving, and tweaking the tempo that you're living at to fit you, not to get stuck in one rut.
Carl, what have you found in your journaling, in your investigation? What have you found are the effects of the rush life that we are living? How does it translate into our health, for example? And I wanted to touch base with two different things: our physical health and our mental health.
I think it takes a toll on both, right? I mean, it's pretty clear that stress, we know the science is very clear that feeling rushed and stressed all the time takes a toll on us in so many ways. So for many people, the wake-up call when you're living too fast is a health problem, right? It's a disease, it's illness. The body says, no, I can't do it anymore. So there are all kinds of health problems that people can suffer from moving too fast physically. Lack of sleep is another one, right? That probably falls into both physical and mental. We are chronically underslept as a society now. And part of that is this fast forward roadrunner approach to daily life. I think we also suffer mental health problems, which have been going up through the roof in all age groups, because we don't have the time to recharge, to reflect, to be in touch with our emotions, to connect socially deeply with other people. There's an epidemic of loneliness, right? Even before the COVID pandemic, people were connected to 5,000 people on Facebook, but had no one to talk to when there was a real problem in their lives, right? And if we lose that social connection, we become unhealthy physically and mentally. So there's a whole package of damage that gets done physically and mentally to us by going too fast. But I think we also sacrifice something else on the altar of speed, and that's joy, right? It's pleasure. It's taking pleasure from things. If you're rushing through stuff, ticking boxes, you're never in the moment, and everything passes in a blur. You don't remember things. You end up racing through your life instead of living it. And I think a lot of people will recognize that phenomenon.
Yes, I actually find very interesting the fact that you are talking about the sleep pattern. And I never thought of us as a sleep-deprived society. And the effects of sleep deprivation, it can be depression and even violence. Are we more prone to being violent due to this sleep pattern disadjustment, to say it in a way?
I think the research suggests that we lose control of our emotional compass. We lose impulse control. That can lead to people being, impetuous, sometimes physically violent. I mean, all these things just fall out the window when you haven't had enough sleep. I mean, your productivity goes down, you're less creative, you're just less you. You're just bringing less to the party if you haven't had enough sleep. And I think that's something we all recognize from our lives. And it's often when we go on vacation and we do actually get a bit of sleep that we feel ourselves recharged and replenished and lighting up. Suddenly our senses are on fire and things, it's like our world goes from black and white to technicolor. We're tasting our food again. We're laughing, all the stuff that we're kind of not doing when we're sleepwalking through our lives in the normal way of things.
Zombie mode. I want you to tell me a little bit about, because you just said it, creativity. Mm-hmm. What happens to our creativity when we are on that zombie mode, on that sleep-deprived human, probably depressed, lacking connections, lacking joy, lacking the actual juices of what being alive means? Is the creativity, how is it kind of subject to disappearing maybe, or just coping to survive?
It is. And I think the science is pretty clear on this, that there's an intimate bond between slowness and creativity. And all the great thinkers and artists and scientists throughout history have always talked about the importance of slowing down. I mean, Charles Darwin called himself a slow thinker. I mean, Einstein used to sit in his office and gaze out into the quad in Yale for hours on end. There is something about slipping into that. I mean, the science actually shows it. The research shows that when we're in a relaxed, unhurried, mellow, slow state, the brain shifts into a richer, more nuanced, more creative mode of thought. And psychologists call it slow thinking, right? And they call it that for a reason. And I'll bet anyone watching this now will recognize that phenomenon, right? If you just think for a second, when do your best ideas come to you, right? Most people's best ideas come to them in the shower, yeah, or walking the dog, or swinging in a hammock on the weekend, right? You can ask that question to people all around the world, to lawyers in London, bankers in New York, doctors in Tokyo, and no one ever says my best ideas come when I'm juggling 45 emails or racing to meet a deadline with the boss or a client breathing down my neck. They come when I'm chilling out, right? Which is why big companies are, carving out moments and times for staff to slow down with quiet rooms and on-site yoga and meditation, all that stuff. They're not doing it because it gives them a warm, fuzzy feeling. They're doing it because it's good for their staff's well-being, physical and emotional. It's good for their creativity as well.
Because we are kind of in a survival mode, right? And I understand that the blood and the oxygen is flowing towards your limbs so you can run, and probably your brain is dissatisfied or not very well kept. Joy. Talk to me about joy. Talk to me about connections, the human need for connecting with someone else, and how can we recover that? Do you have, I don't like the word tip, but do you have any tip or something, an advice that could help us reconnect to people that we haven't seen?
Well, I mean, I think just the first part of your question is the connection there between joy and all the other stuff. I mean, it's so clear to us, isn't it? I mean, nobody lies on their deathbed and looks back and thinks, I wish I'd spent more time on Instagram, right? Or shopping on Amazon, or working for that matter, right? What we remember when we look back are those simple, slow human moments of connection. We remember that long breakfast with our grandmother, that stretched out through the morning a week before she died, right? We remember that long walk we had with our partner just before we decided to have children. We remember those moments with our kids, and all that stuff. That's what gives life texture, color, shade. It gives it meaning and joy. And that's when life takes flight, in those small, slow moments. And in fact, I think one of the silver linings of the COVID pandemic and the shutdown is that a lot of people, having been forced to stay at home, unable, like almost prevented from going outside and doing work or going and commuting, suddenly have found more time. And what are they doing? Well, they're going back to those slower pursuits. Look at this worldwide boom in baking sourdough bread, right? Or knitting, or playing board games, or making music and gardening, all these slow things that they just give people joy, right? It's a simple word, but it's a word that sits at the core of what a life well lived means. And I think slowness is at the heart of that, right? You can't program in these things. You can't schedule in a breakfast like that with your grandmother. Give her 50 minutes. Come on, Gran, talk to me. We need to connect now because I've got to get on. It doesn't work that way, right? Those deep, meaningful, rich connections only happen when we forget the clock and we just give ourselves over to the moment and let the moment unfold, unfurl, and flower and blossom like a beautiful plant, right? That's the only way it works, and it only works through slowing down.
Yeah, you can't rush a flower to bloom, right? We, no doubt, live in a world of speed and of immediatism. We want everything right now. I'm guilty of that, actually. How did you got involved with this movement, Carl? What brought you to want to walk this road of slow movement?
Well, I had a wake-up call when I started reading bedtime stories to my son, and I just got too fast, right? I mean, my version of Snow White had 3 dwarves in it. It was not a good look. My son would say, "What happened to Grumpy tonight?" It was just this awful scenario. And I actually caught myself flirting with buying a book I heard about called The 1 Minute Bedtime Story, right? So Snow White in 60 seconds. And I was thinking, yeah, I need that book now. Amazon, drone delivery. But, that was the light bulb over the head moment. And I suddenly thought, what? How can this be? Am I really prepared to fob off my little boy with a soundbite instead of a story? And I think that was just like a moment of epiphany. And I just thought, I can't go on like this, right? I'm accelerating my life instead of living it. And that was this moment I stepped back and began to just think not only about my own addiction to speed, but like to try and see the bigger picture. And that's when I started writing about it. And it just became, in a way, weirdly, my life's work. But the good news is it works, right? It's worked for me. I've gone from being a card carrying road runner to somebody, like I said earlier, who just simply doesn't feel rushed anymore.
How does it feel?
And I'll tell you, Snow White's way better with 7 dwarves than it is with 3.
What did you say? Like, where are the other dwarves? I don't know. They are on vacation, or they are.
They're on one of the pages. I was like an expert in what I called the multiple page turn technique. It's like you try to turn 3, 4 pages.
I have had the resource of being doing something else and putting an audiobook. Like, we are going to listen to this audiobook together while I'm working. Carl, we have questions, so why not? We should start reading them, and let's these people join us in this conversation. The first question is from Paz Marshall. She's in the United States, and she asked, I have been dealing with insomnia for several years. I have done everything to heal it, but nothing has worked so far. What would be your advice to calming the mind at night? I just can't stop thinking over and over, and I don't feel tired at all.
Ooh, that's a tough one, especially chronic insomnia. I mean, I'm not a specialist on sleep therapy, but I mean, the tips that I always give are the things that I do myself. At the end, I make sure that at least an hour before my head hits the pillow, I'm nowhere near a screen, right? No blue light, nothing like that. And everything I do in that hour is gauged and aims towards sleep. So it would be something like, maybe having a hot bath, or reading a book, or having a conversation with, my partner or something, or whatever. It's just something that just involves shifting into that other gear and staying away from too much excitement, and definitely staying away from the news nowadays. I would recommend, don't bring that into your head before bed. I mean, if you can also incorporate some kind of activity. I mean, I've got a good friend who had a problem with insomnia a few years back, and she managed to fix it by taking up knitting. Like she started knitting, and she knits incredible things now. But at the time, she was just knitting really not very attractive scarves, but would do it for 30, 40 minutes before trying to go, and began to fall asleep and managed to conquer it that way. So some kind of little artistic craft or something that requires total focus and is tactile, involves your hands, can be a very helpful way to start tackling that problem. But good luck, Paz. That's a tough one, I know.
How long have you been in this road? When did you start with your movement, with this slow movement, Carl?
Oh gosh, we're talking now 16 years. I mean, it's a long time. It's probably 16 years. Yeah, 16, 17 years when it first got into this.
What have you encountered? Like, how is people welcoming the slow movement? Do you find people kind of reluctant to slow down? Do you see people more open and wanting to?
I feel it's more and more open. And in fact, I was very surprised at the beginning, because I felt like when I first came out and made this suggestion of a slow movement, I thought, oh, I'm going to be crucified. There's going to be blood on the floor. But actually, people really took to it right away, and the business press loved it and everything. So it's grown and grown in leaps and bounds since then. I mean, I'm always amazed, because I'm sort of in the middle of it. People are always writing to me and saying, oh, I'm doing this with my company, or my city is doing this, or, my school, or this is what I do with my family. And it's just amazing how many new strands of the slow movement are coming out all the time. Whether it's the whole slow fashion movement, which has exploded in the last sort of 2 or 3 years. There's a big movement within the gaming community to build slow games. Somebody wrote to me recently about one where you can make one move a day, which is incredibly slow, right? Maybe slightly too slow for me even. But just the fact that even in that very fast demographic of gamers, they were saying, yeah, sometimes we want to have first-person shooter and lots of adrenaline, but sometimes we want something a bit more contemplative, something a bit more serene, something a bit slower. So it's what I'm seeing now is whatever field of human endeavor you look at, whether it's sex or food or whatever, people are just bringing that lens of slow and saying, how can I do this better by slowing down a little bit, right? Not doing everything slowly, but just saying, slowing down tactically, strategically at the right moments, right? And trying to get more out of that thing. And so I'm feeling pretty good about it. And I must say, like I said earlier, with the pandemic, I think that this is, although the pandemic's been a total nightmare for everyone, I wouldn't have wished this on the world ever in any universe. But I do think a lot of people have tasted slowness in a way that they have found surprising,
delight,
and winning, and are going to carry on wanting to hang on to some of that stuff. So that may be a good side here.
You just said two words that I really liked, and one was contemplative and strategic. And both things to me can give great results. But anyways, there is still people who could think that when you are proposing to slow down, you are advocating probably for procrastinating, for example. I want you to help us, draw the line between procrastinating and leaving everything for later and the actual slow movement that is so rich and it gives so much benefits.
Well, procrastination, if you take it to its logical conclusion, is missing a deadline, right? So that's a very clear thing. You don't want to miss an important deadline. Then on the other side, the right side of the deadline, how do you decide when to work? I mean, that's something that, and a lot of that is trial and error, and it's very personal. Yeah, because some people do work better if they leave things sort of to the end and then feel that little cold shiver of adrenaline, and that gets them going and they get over. Other people are not like that. So I think this is something you need to experiment with and run little pilot projects with. So if you're somebody who always procrastinates, leaves it to the very last minute, and you think that might not be right for you, the next time you get a project, why not just force yourself to work it, earlier and see if you get better results and draw comparisons and find, because there is no universal formula. There's no magic bullet that says this is how much you have to work in this much time. It varies from person to person, project to project, moment to moment. But I think it's a good way of thinking about it is always to run little experiments, always be testing yourself. If you do it one way and it doesn't feel quite right, try something different and then compare and find the middle ground, or stop what you're doing before and move to the new thing if that felt better. So always test out new ways of doing things. If
you ask me, as I hear you, and I hear your technique and I hear your lifestyle, the impression that I get is of assertiveness, is of actually getting to know yourself. When you slow down, that moment of self-recognition, of self-observation. And you have said it a couple times, like you need to find your own way, your own recipe for the speed that will work for you without missing deadlines. Have you encountered yourself feeling more assertive and finding that you can actually do more as you slow down?
Yes, that's the delicious paradox of slow, is that when you slow down and do things at the right speed, you get things done better, and often you get them done faster, right? It's more efficient. There's an old military saying, slow is smooth and smooth is fast, right? Because so often when you do things fast, you make a mistake, you have to go back and fix it. Whereas if you get it right the first time, that's a very good investment of time, across the whole, specter of the project. Coming back to your idea of self-recognition, I think that's one of the things that you gain from slowing down is knowledge of yourself, right? It's a meeting with yourself, because very often for people, speed, busyness, distraction, multitasking, it's a form of denial. It's a way of running away from yourself and ignoring those deeper problems and questions in your life, such as, who am I? What's my purpose here? Am I living the right life for me? It's easier just to sweat the small stuff and to run around juggling 5 things at once and think, the only question you ever ask yourself is, where are my keys? I'm late for the 11 a.m., right? And I think when people slow down, it can be a little scary at first, because if you haven't been doing that existential homework, you haven't been confronting yourself, you haven't got that consciousness about yourself, and suddenly you're faced with your own self, it can be a little bit disconcerting and it can be a bit frightening, but it's how you live a real life, right? It's getting to know yourself. And once you sit with that discomfort, get to know yourself, that's when the assertiveness that you're talking about comes, because you have the confidence. You know who you are, you know how you fit in the world, you know where you stand, you know what you bring to the party. And that gives you the assertiveness to say, okay, this is my pace. This is what I'm able to do. And you're also able to use that very important 2-letter word, no. You're able to say, no, I'm just simply not going to do that, right? I don't want to do that, or someone else can do that. And by saying no to things that are not that important to you, you're actually saying a very big yes to the things that are.
Wow, 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 because you just said that no, and I just identify how many times I am rushing just because I said too many yeses.
Yes.
Like, can you do this for me? Yes, 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 yes. And
Yeah.
at the end of the day, I'm like, how am I going to fit all this within my schedule?
So true, yeah.
I read the other day that I'm going to try and paraphrase it, but it was like the speed in which you live your life is inversely proportional to the depth in which you live your life.
Yeah.
So
Fast.
I wonder if sometimes we actually put ourselves in the fast pace so we can avoid the self-dialogue and that hostile environment that we sometimes have within ourselves.
I think it's often that people, when you say, why are you so fast with, so they blame their boss, or they blame the schedule, very often it comes from us, right? And it's, as you say, or as I was saying as well, it's a way of running away from yourself, right? It's a way of avoiding those bigger questions, the tougher questions. And eventually you're going to have to face them, right? I mean, it's why therapists often describe the last stage of burnout, just before burnout, is one last burst of acceleration, right? So it's like the person is desperately trying to outrun all their problems, all that stuff they haven't been dealing with, and then they hit the wall, right? Then they have a burnout, and then they're forced to confront their problems and themselves, and then they do that existential homework that they didn't do before, and then they find themselves. And you know what? No one has two burnouts, or almost no one, right? Once people have had that, once they've hit rock bottom and they found themselves, then they go back into the world. They may go back to the same career, but they're going to go back with what I would call a slow spirit, right? A knowledge of the self, a confidence, an assertiveness, and a realness, right? And you said it as well there about fast is superficial, skims the surface, slow gets down into the core. It gets to the heart of the matter. It's deep, it's depth, it's rich. Yeah.
If we wanted to encourage people to do the existential homework, the homework that we have been postponing forever, what would you say?
I would say don't try and do it all at once. Yeah, because this is one of the problems now. We're all so impatient. We even want to slow down fast. Yeah, so people want to have the inner calm of the Dalai Lama by tomorrow morning, and it doesn't work that way. It takes time. You have to slow down slowly, if you like. So take little steps, right? Maybe set aside next week, set aside 20 minutes, 15 minutes to sit with no distractions in a quiet place and just let your mind drift and ask yourself some of those questions that you never ask yourself. How am I? How's my family? How am I happy? Right? Where do I see myself in 5 years from now? Am I being of service to other people? All those questions that kind of just get lost in the shuffle and the dash of daily life. And start with that. Start with 15 minutes and then build up from there. And I think once people begin to peel away the layer on top, the onion skin, and you get down into it, you don't want to stop. You want to get down to the juice of the fruit, right?
Carolina Jackson, she is writing through YouTube. So by slow down resolution, you mean making a new resolution in our lives, the way we view our lives, or the way we live the path to reaching our spirituality, changing our core and beliefs?
Yeah, I mean, I think spirituality is a word that we haven't used yet, but I think it's part of this conversation. I think that slow takes you to a place of depth, of meaning, of connection, of transcendence, of human power, of magic, right? And those are all words that I think if you put them together, you could call that spiritual, right? So I think, it's not surprising that every religious tradition has slowness at its core. Think of the Bible, be still and know that I am God. Every religion has a Sabbath, time to rest, all that stuff. These ideas are eternal. They've always been with us. So I think in a world that's kind of pushed some of those notions of rest and spirituality and depth and meaning to one side, slowness is our way to get back to them, right? Slowing down is the key that opens up that door again and gets us back to our basic humanity. That's probably the word, right? I mean, that's, or like Socrates said, it's reflection is how we attend to the soul, right? Let's talk about soul, spiritual. I mean, that's kind of what it all boils down to, right? Consciousness, soul, spiritual, different words for often the same thing.
As you go to the spirituality conversation, I keep just thinking about, and it brought me back to one of the first words that we used about being hungry and craving and greedy for more and more and more, but we keep just eating the surface. When you slow down, you're able to eat the actual fruit, the actual substance, the actual nutrients of life, and that those nutrients are in connections. How do we reconnect? If we asked you, Carl, for an advice on reconnecting with yourself, reconnecting to the people that you haven't seen, how would you do that once we are so disconnected?
Yeah, I think there are lots of ways that we can do that. One is touch. Yeah, I mean, this is something I think that and it's, of course, this difficult thing to do now in a time of pandemic, but there's something so simple and so glorious and so transcendent about human touch, right? We know it has all kinds of physiological effects, but it's also but just simply touching people. I think we've kind of lost that, and holding people for a minute or 2 minutes, I think can make a big connection and a big difference to the tenor and the texture of our relationship. So I would say touch is very important. Obviously with consent, right? I'm not suggesting you go out and just touch someone you bump into in the street. That could end really badly. I think also another thing that I think many of us have rediscovered in this pandemic moment is walking, right? There's something about walking. That walking has this extraordinary effect on the human body and mind. I mean, all the great philosophers have talked about the importance of walking for reflection. Nietzsche famously said, all great ideas are conceived while walking. There's something about walking, especially walking with someone else, going for a walk, a really simple thing, just being together. We're moving, physical beings together, but the conversation that can flow, you're not facing each other, so it's less confrontational. You're both looking forward. There's something about going for a good long walk with someone, I think, that is a really good way to connect, and it's free, and it's there for everyone. Even in pandemic times, we can go for walks. So a third one I'd throw out just to finalize the list would be get back to food. Yeah. I mean, eating together. And I don't mean wolfing down something from Deliveroo on the sofa while watching Netflix. I mean, breaking bread together at the table with the phone switched off. And because, I mean, the word companion comes from the Latin words with bread, right? Because it's precisely when we break bread together. Yeah. It's when we eat together with all the gadgets taken away, just simply that simple human act of sharing food together, that we are at our closest. And that's when connections fire up and things really begin to flow. So that would be another thing I would suggest to people is eat together, not on the sofa in front of Netflix.
Thank you. As we reach the end of our conversation, I wanted to give you a moment so you can give us your closing thoughts.
Gosh. I mean, I suppose my thoughts come back to this moment we've had, because it's hard to get away from this pandemic moment, right? I mean, I feel like one of the upsides is that we've been given back control over, many of us, okay, this isn't everyone, but many of us have regained control over our time in a way we'd never tasted before. So we're not commuting to work, we're at home, we're deciding when we work, when we switch off, when we don't. And that is at the core of the slow movement, because you have to give people control over their time in order for them to be able to use that time wisely, healthily, joyfully. So I think it's interesting that even when companies are saying, come back to the office, people are saying, no, I'm actually kind of happy staying at home, right? And I'm more productive. I'm getting things done. I haven't missed a deadline. Things are going really well. And I'm really enjoying controlling my time. Because some people get up in the morning and they can bash out 2 hours of creative work. Some need 2 hours to get out of bed, right? But if you allow people if you give them the levers to control their own time, that's when the music and the magic happen. So I'm hoping that that's one of the lessons we will take forward from this pandemic. The other lesson, of course, is what I said earlier, that these slow pursuits and the joy of slow things so if we could take those two things forward, maybe this dark moment can turn out to have had a light side to it.
I thank you for that optimistic thought, I agree with you, definitely. And we're looking forward to hear the music of those accords. So it's going to be amazing. Before we leave, of course, we want to thank the people that joined us today and remind you that Mindalia is an international nonprofit organization. You can collaborate with us by liking our content, sharing it. You can follow our social media, subscribe to our channel. When you do that, you're helping us reach as much people in the planet as possible. I'm going to say goodbye now. And as always, thank you for being with us. We will see you again in the next Mindalia live streaming.